Good afternoon, everyone. Many of you don't know me yet. I'm Alejandro Bonilla, president of Greycells, and this is the second session of our great talks. Welcome to the session. Today we have the honor and the privilege to have with us Mr. Michael Moller, who everybody knows and appreciates in Geneva, and who is one of the most known and influential international thinkers and doers. Amongst many high-level positions, Mr. Michael Moller is a former director of the United Nations Office at Geneva, member of the board of the Kofi Annan Foundation. He is recipient of the Bourgeoisie d'honneur of the city of Geneva, and kindly accepted to become Greycells Honorary President. Thank you very much for, indeed, Mr. Moller, for being with us. And allow me, just before starting the great talk, allow me to share with you some sad news. Last Sunday, our dear member Felipe Guerrero passed away, and today, just as we speak, he's been accompanied in his last journey by his wife, Virginia.
Nueva percepción de la bruja que le queremos mostrar, ¿no? A través de resaltar ciertos elementos en esas imágenes.
¿Qué está pasando?
Please mute your micros. And of course, our thoughts and prayers go to Felipe, Virginia, and their family. And let me start by recalling a book that has always impressed me, which is Milan Kundera. And I believe he was right when he wrote The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Isn't that what we are all experiencing and witnessing right now? It really feels like dark times, and paradoxically, and just as days get longer and spring start to blossom. I believe that it is in everybody's mind that the current pandemic of COVID-19 obliges us to reflect on the issues that we are experiencing and witnessing. The unbearable lightness of globalization, the unbearable lightness of the regional agreements, the unbearable lightness of some governments. Is this pandemic a wake-up call and an opportunity to rethink everything and reply to it by humanizing and rationalizing globalization, by strengthening solidarity and collaboration, by acting and preventing instead of reacting and excusing, and by fostering and strengthening multilateralism? I am sure that today's intervention by Mr. Michael Moller and the exchange that will follow with participants during the Q&A session will contribute enormously to the reflection and rethinking of the world and the future we all want. Now, I would like to leave the floor now to Manuela Tortora, Vice President of Greycells, who will share the great talk. Let's get started. You have the floor, Manuela.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Again, good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everybody. I was saying just seconds ago before starting that we have a lot of young people, representative of the young generation here with us. We are very pleased. We have particularly many students from several universities, from Chulalongkorn in Bangkok, from the London School of Economics in London, from the University Anáhuac in Mexico, and of course, University of Geneva, obviously here in Geneva. We hope that this representative of young people, the young generation, will continue with us also in further sessions that we will have with this format of the Grey Talks. Obviously, I will look at the mics. So whenever you have a question, you just unlock the mic if you want to intervene with a question. Otherwise, please keep it closed so that we do not interfere, particularly with our guest, Mr. Michael Møller. We are very pleased to have him today to share with us his ideas, his opinion, his views on what may come after the pandemics, particularly from the point of view of multilateralism. And I would like just to flag a first question that comes to my mind to launch the debate. And the same question is also valid to all of you. We had a First World War that gave birth to a first form of multilateralism in 1920, so 100 years ago. We then had the Second World War that also was the origin of an improved multilateralism after Second World War, can we say that this pandemic is the equivalent of a world conflict that will then be the origin of a new improved multilateralism? Over to you, Mr. Møller, and thank you again for being here with us.
Hi.
Don't
Sorry.
forget to open, yeah.
Yeah, I just did. I want to be with you. I'm also impressed by the fact that this is a global conversation, not just a Geneva conversation, and so I'm very happy about that. I noticed when both of you spoke before that there were moments where we lost your voices. So let me start by saying that if that happens while I speak, just stop me and I'll start again. Or if there are things that we don't hear or that are not clear, just let us know, and I'll just repeat myself. Manuela, you're going to be moderating this, I assume, and we'll sort of decide who speaks when and who asks questions. Okay. Well, thanks for your question, first of all. That's a very good entry point to the few words that I was going to say. I think that I will do this in two phases, talk a little bit about how I see not as so much what's happening today, because we all know that and we feel it on our bodies every day, but how we can turn this catastrophe into an opportunity, as you just hinted at, both of you, Manuela and Mr. Bonino. And then have a short description of some of the things that I'm doing these days. Particularly, I want to do that because I would like to see, as I've already talked with your leadership, about the possibility of energizing some of you and engaging some of you to maybe think of providing some voluntary work for some of the organizations that I'm engaged with down the road. Of course, this is not going to happen now because we're all sitting at home, but at least we can start thinking about it, or you can start thinking about it if there are areas in which you may want to contribute. So let me first come back to today. It's clear that we live in a difficult time. I don't need to tell you that. I think that it's, I mean, and the difficulty is, to me, the obvious one is, of course, the health issue that we're dealing with. But my frustration and my being appalled every morning when I listen to the news is the complete and utter lack of coordination and collaboration that we're seeing, both at national and international and local levels, where everybody is kind of doing what they want. And I guess that to some extent, it is a human reaction when there is a threat, in many cases a threat to our very lives, that one looks inward and stays within your own little group. But the fact is that we're not going to make it, and we're not going to solve this, and with any speed at least, and certainly not with the required speed, unless we work together. And this is true both for the health catastrophe that we are having and the health pandemic, but it's equally true for the economic and financial pandemic, if you want, that is already in the making, and that will be one of the major consequences of this health pandemic, particularly if it lasts longer than most of us hope. And I'm afraid that it will last a little longer than most of us hope. Every pandemic has three phases. If you speak to immunologists and experts on the theme, and we are in the first phase, and we will probably be seeing a second phase in the fall, and then the third one in the beginning of next year. That's just the way things are, and we have to adapt to it. Of course, by then, many of us will have become immune and will be able to go about our business, but it is going to continue to be a difficult time health-wise. It's going to be a very difficult time economically and financially on a global scale. And as I said before, unless we find ways, and our leaders find ways to sit down and manage this in a much more coherent way that they have so far shown signs of doing, then we're in for a fairly rough ride, I'm afraid. Now, the interesting part of what we're seeing around the world is, and the hopeful part, is the extraordinary levels of solidarity and coordination that we see at the local level amongst people. where people are helping each other. We are seeing a very renewed sense of solidarity. And this is one that we have to leverage. I think that is going to be one of the strong foundations for the direction in which we're going to be going, which Manuela hinted at before. So the combination of the newfound solidarity, if you want, plus the fact that, as it always does, reality imposes itself on us much sooner than later, and that it's going to be every day more obvious that unless we sit down and find a very different way of working together to make sure that this happens and that we get in the right direction, then we are going to have a very hard time making it. Now, I want to step back a little bit and just remind you of something that we tend to forget, particularly in times of like these, where everything is dark. And that is that what has happened the last 70 years, the international system that we created both after First World War and reinforced after the Second World War, this international structure has given the human race a level of well-being, of peace, and of peace that is completely unprecedented in the history of mankind. We have never, ever been as well off as we are today, in spite of what you may read in the newspapers and the crisis here and there, and particularly also this pandemic now, which is obviously a dark blot on what I'm trying to say now. But the fact is that we've never been better off. We're healthier, we live longer, we're better educated, we eat well or better, we travel better, we communicate better. Every human indicator that we care to look at is in a much better place than it's ever been before. And we take, after 70 years, we tend to take it for granted and we don't really think about it. But the fact is that this level of well-being has been achieved because the world created this interlocking international system that has been in place for the past 70 years. The fact is also that today that multilateral system it hasn't been renewed properly. It is not up to the task to deal with the challenges that we have in front of us, the very existential challenges that we have in front of us, and not just the health challenge, although this is one of them, because we are going to see other pandemics coming down our way. It's a way of nature to cleaning up the mess that we have created, but also the climate, which is certainly also in the same category, very existential, if not in my mind, the #1 existential challenge that we have to deal with. And if we don't deal with it, then frankly, all the rest doesn't really matter because we're not going to be around to figure it out. There are all sorts of others, whether you want to look at the economic structures of the world, at the issue of corruption, at the issue of education, etc. All of these issues are major existential issues that can only be dealt with if we do it in a collaborative, integrated, and networked way. Based on what we have done before. We have done extraordinary things before, and we have proven that it can be done. Let me remind you of what happened with the first set of goals. Could you unmute? Could you mute your microphones, whoever is speaking, please? Thank you. You threw me there a moment. Anyway, so where was I?
Many things have been done.
Huh?
You were mentioning that many things have been done.
Yes, all of the things that have been done, and we have, in other words, we have a very solid basis on which to move forward. When I say that we have to figure out a way of turning this current calamity into an opportunity, is that we have to somehow find out and figure out how we can move in a direction of a renewed, rethought, restructured multilateral system and collaborative effort to deal with the problems of the planet. The one we have today is government-centric, state-centric, if you want, and this is the way that we have governed our planet for the past many decades. That is no longer a model that works. We are already now in a transition in governance terms from a system where the state and the government is at the centrality of actions and decisions, to a system that is much more polycentric, multi-stakeholder, whatever you want to call it. We are seeing this happening. We have some absolutely excellent examples of this happening at the not so much at the international, the regional level yet, but we are getting there. We are between two chairs in a sense. We're between the system that, the old system that is still there, the old Westphalian system, as I said, that was with the government at the center, of the nations at the center, to a system where many more people are around the decision-making table. The old system is on the defensive. It's asymmetrically defending itself, if you want. Some governments have gotten the message and are reaching out to other actors in society. Others are closing their doors, as we're seeing, and becoming even more authoritarian to defend and to maintain the status quo and their grasp on power. But we are inexorably moving in the direction of a system where there will be several people around that decision-making table. Now, the problem is, as I said, that we're between two chairs. The new system is not legitimized yet. It's not really structured yet. And whenever you are between two systems, then nonsense happens. And I dare say that nonsense is exactly what we're living through now, not just in terms of the health problem we have, but certainly also in terms of the things that we're seeing happening in a number of societies and a number of governments, and that are actually at this stage those people who have closed those doors and who have gone the way of thinking that they can deal with the problem, to use the pandemic to strengthen those powers even more. All I have to mention in this case, for example, is what just happened in the Hungarian parliament a couple of days ago. So how do we move what is happening now? How do we build on the experiences that we are collecting now, and how do we help society move in the right direction? Here again, I think it's going to be really crucial that the words and the actions of civil society is going to be part of what will help us turn in the right direction. If we leave it to governments, it's not going to happen. That is a given right now, unfortunately. Very few governments are going to be, in fact, divesting themselves of the power they have already. So we need the business community. We need the academic community, we need the press, we need people who are not in power, but who have the wherewithal to bring a voice to the table. We certainly need the young generation. You are the ones who are going to be leading this planet, if there is a planet to be led down the road, and to deal with the problems that we have created. So it has to be a collaborative effort in ways that we have never done it before. I think it's happening already, and can see it in many areas, and there is many areas that we can learn from. I will give you a few examples where this multi-stakeholder governance model works extremely well already in structures that have been created. If you look, for example, at organizations like Gavi or the Global Fund, that for those of you who don't know what they are, these are two organizations in the health sector that do millions of vaccinations around the world every year. They're governed by a collaborative approach between state representatives, UN representatives, business representatives, civil society representatives, representatives of patients and sick people and the medical profession. And it is amongst the most performing, better performing, and most well-funded organizations that we have in the family of UN organizations, simply because they have proven themselves and they deliver in an extraordinary rate with so we have examples. We have, I think, an understanding, a level of collaboration, and empathy, and understanding that we need to work together, and solidarity that we can build on. But it is, in this case, I want to make sure that every single one of you understands the level of personal responsibility that we all have to acquire in order for this to happen. This is otherwise it's simply not going to happen. And organizations like yours, groupings of people who have experience and expertise, who have dedicated their lives to doing things that have a direct impact on the way that we live during, and therefore can bring that experience to bear. I think it's enormously crucial that you don't think that somebody else is going to do it for you, but that you understand that each one of us has a responsibility to help move the needle in the right direction. I think maybe I'll stop here and just say a few words about some of the things that are happening here in Geneva, where many of you, not just those of you who belong to Greycells, but others who have time, and also young people. In the first instance, I'm sure that the way that we're beginning to work is going to be the way that technology has helped us in these difficult days, the last couple of weeks and the next couple of weeks, and has inserted itself into our lives in the way that we get taught and the way we learn, in the way that we work, the way that we shop, the way that we talk to our doctors, the way that we connect to each other, etc. This is not going to go with extraordinarily powerful tool that is actually going to help us in many ways, and can help us in our objective to move in a collective way towards a governance system of our planetary affairs that it makes more sense, that is more collaborative, that is more that takes into account more voices, and that is more egalitarian in many ways than what we have right now. You are seeing today, just to reinforce the point, increasing gaps in many of the countries that I mentioned that are going in the wrong direction, increasing gaps between what the leadership are doing and what the people in the countries are want to do and the way they react. So, and in that mix, I want to mention another set of actors that are kind of in between. And those are the mayors, for example, of big cities, who are much more powerful actors today, political actors, in many cases than the national actors, and those who certainly are closer to the citizen. They're the ones who bring the services to the citizen, and also have an increasing amount of power in making sure that things are going in the right direction and that the needs of those citizens are met. More and more of us are living in cities. By 2050, the prediction is that 75 to 80% of the global population will be living in cities, which means that through these mayors that are now doing extraordinary work, we are going to change, not just through technology, but also through demographics, the way we live, the way we do agriculture, the way that we teach, the way that we do everything in our daily lives. So these are very powerful actors that we need to bring into, and they're already in there if you want. I will give you an example. I was part of the creation of a network of cities that we call the SDG Cities Network. And from all over the world, people in Africa, in the United States, in Europe and Asia. And these cities work together in order to learn from each other's experiences on how they can implement the SDGs in their cities, and are doing absolutely extraordinary stuff and are leveraging each other's knowledge and expertise. There's not a single one of these mayors that refers back to the national governments. They just couldn't care less. They get on with the job. And I mentioned that as an example of what's going on right now and what is happening. And this trend is going to continue. And of course, we will have some years where there will be tensions at the national levels between the city level and the national level. There will be tension between countries. There will be tension at regional level. And there's certainly, if you look at what's happening in Europe, where we are now, and how the European Union is more or less falling apart, simply because everybody thinks they can go in their own direction, and that the collaborative reflex and ideal and values that was at the very foundation of that way. I hope we'll find them again, and it's also part of what I'm talking about refining those set of values and those understandings that unless we work together, we're not going to make it. So we are. When I left the UN last July, first of all, I joined, as Mr. Brunella said, the Kofi Annan Foundation. It has just undergone a massive change. There's a new Secretary General, a new president, There's a new board, there's a new director, just announced a few days ago. And we're transitioning that foundation from basically what was a one-man operation with a secretariat into a full-fledged foundation in a normal sense, which is going to have to find the trust of its clients and future clients and of its donors, etc. They are on a good track. I think we'll make it. And very often these kinds of foundations have a hard time making that transition. You can, for example, look at what happened to the Mandela Foundation way back when he left us. It didn't quite take off, if you want, in substantive terms. It basically spends its time defending the legacy of its founder. But the Kofi Annan Foundation is doing a lot of good stuff in terms of elections in the digital age, in terms of transitions to peace from war situations, and first and foremost also in terms of a whole series of very, very successful youth programs, particularly one which I like a lot, which is called Extremely Together, where they're helping young people in difficult countries that are in crisis fight extremism. And they've done so well that two of their young women, one from Libya and one from Sudan, were part of the group of people that were proposed for the Nobel Peace Prize. So that foundation is now taking off again, and although everybody's working at home, I want to flag that because the new director may very well want to reach out to you to see if some of you would like to help in one form or the other. So that's number one that I want to flag. Keep it in mind and look at their website, see what they're doing, and I will mention our talk if any of you in our answer period exhibit an interest in being in touch with them. We can arrange that. The second thing I'm doing is I'm working on a new initiative that is really quite interesting, that was created by the government, and a collaboration between the government, the federal government, and the government of the canton, and in which the preparation and the invention of which I took part while I was still Director General. It has a kind of clunky title. It's called, and you may have seen stuff about it in the press, it's called the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator. It is a foundation whose job it is to put together cutting-edge science, stuff that's happening in the laboratories right now, together with the practitioners of diplomacy, development, health, human rights, humanitarian affairs, etc. And have a conversation between science and people like you and me, a conversation that hasn't never really happened between these two communities who don't have a habit of talking to each other. Anyway, the idea is to put them together to discuss what is cooking in the laboratories, talk to the scientists who are working on them, to come up with an agreement on which of these new technologies can best be turned into the appropriate tools to be given to the practitioners in the development field, in the health field, in the humanitarian field, etc., to improve their ability to deliver to the people most in need. Now, this is not about technology that is already on the table. It's about technology that will be coming forward in the next 5 to 10 years. But we need, as this pandemic very much has proven, we need to be much better prepared. We need to think a little bit ahead, or more than a little bit ahead, and prepare ourselves and really start thinking creatively. What are the needs? What are the tools that we're going to need to making sure in the future, in a future that is going to be very different than what we have today, one that has been changed dramatically by technology, but one that also gives us extraordinary opportunities to do stuff that we've never been able to do before, simply because of that technology. So this is a foundation that I often use the description in layman terms, that is, in a way, it's a mixture between a dating agency and an interpretation agency, where we are helping these two communities that speak very, very different languages to come together to understand each other, and then to take a decision together on what kind of technology we can use in the future. This is a new foundation. It's just being set up. We started formally the 1st of January. We started a few months earlier to do the preparation, but the fact is that we're still in the setup phase. And it may very well be that in the months to come, there will be opportunities for those of you who are interested to give a hand in one area or the other. It's both in terms of the academic area, the scientific area, the outreach area, the organizing the discussions and conferences with people both from the diplomatic community here, from the different organizations, and from different governments, business community, NGO community, etc. Again, this is one of the tools, one of the reasons why I'm excited to work with it, because I see very clearly the opportunity to use and leverage a foundation that is in the form that we're creating it, to be a kind of proof of concept of the new kind of multilateralism that we want to build, where we have a much more collaborative effort, a much more integrated effort, and a much less bureaucratic effort to get to where we need to go. So these are the two areas I wanted to highlight. I'm happy to talk about that. I'm happy to talk about anything else for that matter. And let me stop talking here and give the floor back to Manuela. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Møller. That was really an excellent introduction to our debate. Just as a reminder to everybody, if you have a question, I will try to see if your mic is open. Please stick to the topic, which is multilateralism, to make it short, the future of multilateralism after this crisis. And in case you need to write your question while somebody else is talking, open the chat button at the bottom of the screen so that you can write on the right column on the last line, and I can see what you are writing and what is your question. So the floor is open on questions on the future of multilateralism.
Could I just maybe ask that
sure.
we take 2 or 3 questions at a time, then I answer them? Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Sure, absolutely. The floor is open.
There seems to be 4 chats already. I don't know if you see that, Manuela. Maybe I can start by answering that.
Yes, if you wish, unless somebody wants to speak.
Can I ask a question?
Mohan, yes, Mohan, please go ahead, Mohan.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to go first because it's almost midnight in Singapore, but so I don't fall asleep on all of you. Thank you, Mr. Møller, for your introduction. I agree with a lot of what you said. There is one troubling aspect of the multilateral system which won't go away unless the parameters of how multilateralism should be changes. How it changes, who should be the players, and who should be the decision makers, and how these are implemented are questions that need to be answered, because under the present system, as you say, they're not being adequately responded to. Even in a small crisis, there is no international cooperation. In a larger one, it is totally absent. No one is spared. No one is spared. Neither EU nor ASEAN has spared this. There's a lot of talk but very little action. So when you talk about a new system, I don't want to call it multilateralism yet, because we don't know what will happen between now and the fall of 2020. Who is still standing and who can still be counted upon to do anything? What should this multilateral system look like realistically? Will it still be a power game between the rich and the powerful countries calling all the shots all the time? That has to change, no doubt, but how will that change? How will that change, and how will it actually be effective in societies that are extremely poor, or in societies that have the resources to address the socioeconomic injustices and inequalities of this world? Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Møller, if you wish.
Yeah, let me do that. Okay. Yes, Juan. Thank you for your question. I mean, it goes straight in the direction of what I was talking about. I mean, you know, what the kind of system that we're looking at, that I'm looking at, or that I'm thinking of, and I'll give you a very practical example in a moment. I see things. But it's going to be a much more polycentric, if you want, a multi-stakeholder. And that means that there will be the government. If you take one particular country, there will be a representative of the government in one way or the other. We're not going to be doing away with governments for quite a while. There will be somebody from the cities. There will be somebody from the business community. There will be somebody from the civil societies in different configurations. And there will certainly be somebody from the youth. How we select who is going to be is what is at stake right now, because clearly, you know, in the kind of democratic system that we have, one very obvious question that comes to mind when you see a table full of people that all say that they're there to decide is who voted for you, and what is the legitimacy of you being around that table. So we have to figure out systems that can do that. I don't think it's very difficult. It's just a matter of rethinking a little bit how we engage and we empower the different parts of society. I think that when we then look at that at the next level of things, where you asked a very legitimate question about the massive gap that we are living right now between the haves and the have-nots. I think that if we go back to our example of the pandemic that we have now, it is really clear that unless those who have give part of what they have to strengthen the health systems and the ability of those who have not to deal with this pandemic in a way that gives them a minimum of protection and a minimum of ability to staunch the pandemic, etc. It's a boomerang that goes right back at us. If we don't help, to be very specific, if we don't help the African continent that is completely unprepared in most cases for this pandemic. Now, it may be that both demographic realities and climate realities will lessen the spread of it, but the fact is that it is moving fairly quickly in a number of these countries right now. We have to collectively give them the ability to deal with this, and we have to do it now, and we have to help them with technology. We have to help them with doctors. We have to help them with nurses. We have to help them with teachers. And it's a little bit the same if you want, if you extrapolate from that and you go to a new kind of governance where we have to figure out a way of bringing in those countries in a meaningful way around the decision-making table. It is no longer possible to have this kind of paternalistic post-colonial approach to governance of the planet that we've had for the past 70 years. It doesn't work. It has proven that it doesn't work. And the fact is that the development in many of these parts of the world is going very quickly now. And we're seeing economic development, and we're seeing educational developments that is moving these societies very fast into areas where you can no longer dare to say that they don't have the wherewithal or the level of education or the intelligence or whatever kind of bad excuse you want to use not to make them part of the conversation. There are a number of countries in Africa that have growth rates and most of the rest of the world would only dream of right now. There is, if you look at some of the inventions and some of the imaginative ways in which the Sustainable Development Goals are being implemented in the countries in Africa, in Latin America, and Asia, they are way ahead of the game in terms of that than many countries in the north. I often tell my colleagues in the northern governments that if you want inspiration on how to do this well, then go down to some of the southern countries where they've really figured out how to work together to do this in a way that has an impact. We will see these different kinds of models. Let me give you an example of something that that is a very telling example, if you want, a very very impactful example, and that is the Security Council. Most people on this planet, when you talk about the UN, they think of the Security Council and the fact that it's not doing its job, and that's a nice way of describing what it's doing right now. It is a good example of what I'm talking about. The Security Council was created by states, for states, in a very specific geopolitical reality, which is simply no longer present today. We are in a completely different place historically, socially, economically, politically. So we have a structure that is supposed to be in charge of our collective peace and security, which is no longer relevant in terms of governance structures. And we've tried, when I say we, the world has tried to reform it for the past 30 years in a totally sterile conversation that has led us absolutely nowhere. And the reason for that is that most of the governments, because they are the ones who are going to have to do the change, according to the rules at least, are not in the least interested, particularly those who have the veto power, to change the system. And that would mean, if they changed it, that would mean loss of power for them and loss of control. So it's a kind of, it's a counterintuitive to think that those who sit in it will be the ones who change it. The fact is, as I said, that reality is imposing itself on us right now, and particularly on that. If you look at the press today and yesterday on the ability of the Security Council to even be visible in terms of a reaction and much less of solutions to the pandemic that we're living right now, you get the picture. And it's every time there's a problem like that, the criticism gets bigger and bigger. So to give you an example of potential new structures of how we can rethink structures, my idea would be to totally change the structure of the council and make it a much more flat organization and much more networked organization. And instead of one council, you have 5 regional councils and an overarching council. And each region will have, a number of, you will have rules that govern who sits on it. You would have smaller councils. You have 15 members and on a rotating basis, according to some very strict rules. And that would mean several things. It would mean, first of all, that those who sit there talk and act knowing the peculiarities of their region and are actors in that region. They would be able to bring in non-members from civil society, from business, and others who have a say in a particular problem that has to be solved. It will mean that it will, in one go, if you have 5 regional council and 1 overarching council that will have representative of each of the 5, you will make it more representative, much more than it is today. The council today is not at all representative of the reality, the geopolitical realities. You will have one that will be dealing with the problems at hand in a way that ensures that they know what they're talking about. It will be able to reach out and have conversations with other actors. And it will hopefully, through that way, recapture the trust that people have to have in a structure like that. One of the big problems that we have, and we haven't talked about yet, is the massive trust deficit that the world is operating under right now. I mean, we're in a time in history where nobody trusts anybody any longer, and that is at the international level, it's at the regional level, it's at the national level, it's at the communal level. I've seen some of those over the years. I've followed the polls that have been taken in terms of trust, and it's really quite appalling. In some polls, people say that they trust the mafia more than they trust the police, the doctor, the journalist, the political leaders, etc. So we're in a bad place in trust-wise, and unless we get that back, we're going to have a very hard time recreating any kind of structure. We have to prove, and that's the only way to get trust back, we have to prove that we are effective, that we are going to be providing the services that the citizens need, and that the citizens will feel, each one of us will feel that the system that will be created is looking out for him or her individually, that you feel that you are taken care of one way or the other, whether it's through your mayor, whether it's through your communal politician, whether it's your national politicians, but you have to somehow feel that your needs are taken care of, that your security is taken care of, and that your well-being is taken care of. So there you are. There's a couple of examples that I think I hope answer partially your question.
Thank you, Mr. Møller. I have several questions here on my screen. I will try to group, some of it are already in your answers, in your comments. Maybe you would like to elaborate a little bit more. I will take 2 questions first and then the others. The first two questions together, Brooke and Fatima are asking, in this proposed new multilateral system, how can we avoid business and donor stakeholders to monopolize the discussion table? And Fatima is asking, considering the clear environmental crisis, some scientists and academics say that the best measure to assure a future would be to actually have countries be more protectionist, to go back to more simple times. What are your thoughts on this? And then I have other questions from Sophia, Gabrielle, and Amer. I will take that in a second.
Hello.
Your mic, please.
Yeah, I know. I keep forgetting that. I'm sorry. One of the things we have to do is, individually, is to really make an effort to step out of the box that we've been living in for the past many decades. Some of these questions are predicated on business as usual kind of approach, on thinking that things will move the way they did, that the reflexes both of business and other actors are going to be the same. And I question that. I will tell you that, for example, the way that, and even before the pandemic, the way I have been seeing for the past couple of years, business, both multinational business, but also national businesses, changing their outlook, their working methods, their business plans, their understanding of their role in society, and their readiness to work towards improving society, I have not seen before. And that is continuing. It's certainly continuing now. When you look at some of the more outlandish decisions that some of our national leaders are taking, it's in every case, it's a business that steps in, not only to rectify that policy, but also to bring material, to bring health protection material, to bring money, to bring and to bring the assistance that's needed, both at the global scale, but also in the societies and the communities in which they operate as businesses. So there is a change in mindset that is happening to a very large extent, and started and certain accelerated by the advent of the Sustainable Development Goals that in a very quite extraordinary way and a counterintuitive way had become the global roadmap for action for people across the globe in a way that we haven't seen before either. So I think my optimism, if you want, is predicated and is based on the fact that I'm seeing a mindset change that has to be encouraged, has to be maintained, has to be accelerated, and will be, if it is maintained, and if it is a true one that becomes more and more expanded, is going to be incredibly important as a foundation for any kind of new structure that we create, because those people are going to be part of the decision-making table, whether you like it or not. It's, as I said, it's not just governments, it's not just local governments and cities. Business community has a seat at the table. I know that for many of us, particularly those of us who have worked in the UN system for many years, talking to business community is anathema. It's like talking to the devil. That we can no longer afford to think that way. We have to bring them in and make them a member of a collective decision-making process and action-making process. The second question was? Manuela,
yes, the second question.
Website.
Can you hear me?
I can't hear you. You're breaking up.
Please close your mic, Jean. Amer, also close your mic, so that I can go back to the second question, which was, considering the clear environmental crisis, some scientists and academics say that the best measure to assure a future would be to actually have countries be more protectionist, to go back to more simple times. What are your thoughts?
I completely disagree with that. I think that again, no, can you hear me? Yeah, I disagree with that. I think that is a clear road to disaster. There is absolutely no way that we can deal with the climate in a fragmented and individual manner. It's simply not going to happen. It's same with the health crisis. You know, A virus doesn't know about borders. It affects everybody, whatever you do. So unless we work in a different collaborative way, I mean, as I said before, the kind of state-centric, very politicized manner in which we have tried to deal with the climate doesn't work anymore. One of the big problems that we have is a structural problem, is the growing gap between short-term political systems that most of our countries on the planet have and the long-term solutions we have to apply to these problems that we have ahead of us. Most of our national politicians don't have the capacity, the wherewithal, the knowledge, or the will to take decisions or deal with stuff that is going to happen 10 years down the road. They work in 3 to 4 year cycles. That's their electoral cycles, and that's what they're dealing. That's their framework. It doesn't work anymore, and it's becoming an increasingly big problem because most of the decisions, most of the actions that we have to take today will have an effect 10 years from now, 15 years from now. And that is the way we have to work. The only way this is going to happen is by bringing in people who understand that. And it's not today's national politicians, at least the vast majority of them. And that's simply a structural problem. It's also a problem of quality of the leadership that we have seen at the, at that level, at the national level, diminish over the past. And I'm afraid to, I'm being very frank with you now, but I'm afraid to say that most of those leaders are not simply shouldn't be there, as far as I'm concerned. They're not taking care of their societies in a way that they should. So that's why others are stepping into up to the plate. Other actors are coming forward. It's not by chance that the youth changed completely the conversation about climate the last 2 years, because the youth woke up, looked around, saw that our leaders had betrayed them and are not giving them the tools that they need to manage our planet in the future, which is not that far away, and to take care of the mess that we've left them. And others are stepping up to the plate as well to help them. And that includes the business community, it includes the civil society community, and there's many different kinds of iterations. It certainly includes the academic community. The two things that we need to do collectively as well in order to reinforce that movement is, one, to change dramatically the educational systems that we have in many countries. Most educational systems are still educating our kids for yesterday, not for tomorrow. And that has to happen hand in hand with a deep change in the way that the press is working. And that is happening. There's a new trend that is catching on quite quickly that is called constructive news. And that is changing very much the way that that news outlets, whatever they are, whether they're social media or whether they are traditional paper or TV or radio, are changing the way that they're presenting the news in ways that empower people, that give them hope. In very simple terms, it's when a journalist is reporting on a crisis of any kind, instead of just reporting the catastrophe and painting a dark picture of what is happening, he or she also takes some time to go and find somebody that's actually found a solution to the problem and incorporates it into the story. And it completely changes the narrative. It completely changes the way that people react to these news, and it gives them a chance and an understanding that there are solutions, that there are a way forward, and that there is a room for them to be part of that solution. So that was a long answer to your second question as well. I'm sorry about that, but that's what I think.
Manuela, I have
Thank
one.
you. One second, please, Geshe. I have some 5 or 6 very good questions. I will try to relate them. The good news is that they were partially addressed already by Mr. Moller comments, but anyway, I will flag them again. For instance, one question refers to the big power, America, Russia, and China. And I think you mentioned that more or less when you refer to the Security Council. Some other questions refer to the mechanism that we can ensure to have a new multilateralism where new stakeholders can take place and can also replace business dominant in terms of tax evasion and protection of human rights. I mean, how to integrate all these concerns in a new multilateralism. as the one you mentioned there. I'm simplifying. There are many detailed questions here. If you want to address all of them together, please, Mr. Møller.
Yeah. Well, you know, we're talking about a process here. This is not going to change from one day to the other. And some of these concerns are, of course, correct ones, but I'm also I think I partly answer that in saying that I see a big change, a really existential change in the way and that many of these actors are moving. You know, I don't know if you saw a couple of months ago, 150 of the biggest companies in the United States signed a letter to the public in which they made it very clear that they no longer thought that shareholders were the only clients, if you want, or the only goal of their business models, but that stakeholders in the communities in which they worked were just as important, and that they had to completely change the way that they thought about their business and the way that they were doing their business, and how they became much better corporate social corporate citizens, and how they integrated better in their societies and helped these societies move along. So, as I said, you know, the world is certainly not perfect. We are nowhere near where we need to be yet, but we are certainly a long way away from where we were just a few years ago. The issue of tax evasion, the issue of corruption, is clearly a huge issue. If we did away with all the tax evasion, and we did away with all the corruption, we could pay for the implementation of the global goals several times over, I don't know, 5 or 10 times over. It's an enormous amounts of money. And I think that realization is coming to the fore as well. There is more and more of the very rich who have decided that they are going to be paying taxes. I was part of the launch of an initiative some time ago where multi-billionaires got together and are convincing their fellow billionaires to start paying taxes, and to start by starting to a certain percentage of what they have already. You see philanthropic activities have exploded over the past several years, certainly in the United States, but also in Europe now and elsewhere. So there's a lot of money out there that is looking for a good place to go. And more, particularly among the younger millionaires and billionaires, there's a very different kind of mindset in which they are ready to give a big chunk of what they have earned, but they also want to make sure that they are themselves participant in the implementation of the many projects that they're funding. So we are in a movement. We are in a place where we are seeing some very interesting and very deep changes happening in the way the different parts of our societies are rethinking and recalibrating the way forward, and the way they personally are going to be a part of that change. My problem is to figure out a way, and this has to be the result of a much broader conversation, including with people like you, is how do we ensure that we capture that? You know, in 2008, when we had the financial crisis, a lot of us thought that this was really the kick to the system that was so hard and so big that it would change the structure, that we would really come to our senses and start looking at this new structure. 6 months later, it was back to business as usual. Now, the big change with this pandemic that we have now is that it affects everybody. There's not a single person on this planet that hasn't affected themselves or has a member of his or her family or a friend who has this damn virus. And it's affecting our leaders. A lot of our leaders are in home confinement and with the virus. So it's become a personal thing, and the personal effects of these kinds of crises tend to have an effect in terms of how we think for the future. How do we leverage that? How do we make sure that a couple of months or 6 months after the pandemic is over, that we've forgotten about being ready for the next one, that we've forgotten about collaboration, that we've forgotten about the sense of solidarity that we have built up in our societies? That's my question to you and to myself and to everybody, and certainly the thing that we need to work on. I think that we have the knowledge, we have the human capital, we have the expertise and the experience, not just in the international structures, but also in the societal structures. And we have an enormous amount of innovation and good ideas out there, also in places that most people don't even think about for innovation. And we have to just have some more will. Now, many people for the past decades, when we talk about will, mean political will. I don't talk about that anymore because I think, as you may have understood from what I've said, I think it is becoming increasingly irrelevant what the political will is.
Skype.
What?
Ça va?
I beg your pardon?
La Zoom.
Allô?
Yeah.
Ouais, moi je m'entends.
Ben, j'entends deux voix là, alors je sais.
Et je m'enlève, comme ça peut-être ça donne une chance. Je m'enlève.
Ah, Zoom US, c'est ça?
Je m'enlève. Tac.
Non, mais il n'y a rien qui
Oui,
donne.
oui, mais à tout, mais
Ah si, c'est bon.
Let me finish here. I think.
c'est bon.
Okay. All right. So let me just stop there. I think that you know it's a process, and it's a process that is much further down the road to where it needs to go than many of us think. It needs to be accelerated. It needs to be supported. It needs to be helped, and it needs to be collective in its approach in order to get there. So let me stop there and get there.
Thank you, Mr. Møller. I just have 3 more questions. I will try to collapse all of them in a shorter version. The first one is on the future. Please, Yves, please close your mic. Thank you. The first one is on the future of humanitarian assistance in the context.
I have one sector that has not been.
Yeah, Geshe, please write your question on the column. Thank you. The first one is on the future of humanitarian assistance in the context that you described. The second one is concerning the information. What is the reliable information that we can manage today when we navigate internet? What is reliable in the newspapers or the websites? And finally, a question that I found very interesting from Amer, from the point of view of a teacher or somebody who is in charge of education. What sort of messages can be sent to the students? I think this is also very interesting for many of us. If we have time, I will then take another round of questions. Thank you.
Okay, so humanitarian, this is obviously a crucial question for many people. We've never had the humanitarian structures, and the humanitarian community has never had as many clients, if I may say so, as it has now. We're walking straight into another catastrophe, because once this virus hits refugee camps and migrant camps in their current configuration, it's going to be a major disaster, and it's already beginning, I'm afraid. The fact is that our humanitarian reflex needs to stay, it needs to be strengthened, it needs to be improved. I think that we need to rethink the structures as we have them now, because they're the old structures with the divides between refugees, between migrants, between internally displaced persons, between all sorts of categories. They're all human beings that need help, and we are in the next few years going to be in a situation where even more of them are going to need help. So we have to rethink a little bit how we do it. I think that the fragmented structure that the UN has needs to be looked at, part of its reform process. You have 4 or 5 different organizations, if not more, that are all doing humanitarian work with overlaps in both programs and geographical areas, and with which is not the optimal way of using the money, or the scarce money that is there. So as far as the future is concerned, there is going to be an increasing need. As far as the humanitarian system's effectiveness is concerned, it really needs to be looked at very, very seriously and very fast. It's, you know, we cannot say that we are going to leave no one behind, and in the same breath, while saying so, turning our face away from the people that need it the most, which are people in Italy, which are people in the Greek islands, which are people in Libya, in places like Yemen, and there are enough places around the world where there is catastrophic conditions for people, and it's simply not acceptable to allow that to continue. The problem is that the system is under strain, and one has to. This is part of the rekindled, rethought, reinvigorated international solidarity that needs to be built up, because part of that is certainly the humanitarian reflex that needs to be sharpened and that needs to be improved, including with much more resources than we have right now. So that's definitely a work in progress, and it's one in which all of us also need to take part in trying to improve on that. It's not in a good place right now. The news, well, it's a huge problem. This is the dark side of technology, I'm afraid. One of the dark sides of technology. There are many others. The fake news and the way that it's being used, that the news are being used, or news outlets and new technologies are being used to completely blur the pictures, is quite appalling. I mean, I'm seeing now more and more structured responses to it and efforts to change it. I think that here also we have an individual responsibility to not just accept it, but to certainly not let us be led by it. I mean, if there's one good example, is again back to our pandemic right now. There is one place on the web and in this world that will give you the right information about the pandemic, and that is WHO's site. All the other stuff is suspect in one form or the other. All sorts of suggestions of how you test yourself, all sorts of suggestions for ridiculous medicines that has killed several people already across the world. It's really has both a political but also a very physical effect on people. So governments, organizations, civil society, all of them are scrambling to figure out a way of countering and neutralizing this use of news, not just in the current context of the pandemic, but certainly also in terms of how our political systems are being infected by it, how a number of countries are interfering using technology into the elections of other countries. All of these things are part, if you want, of the, I would say, the infancy of technology, and a lot of people are working on it. One of the interesting things is most of us are from Geneva. Geneva is really becoming the hub in which many of these activities and discussions and search for solutions are happening in the digital sphere and the cyber sphere, and there's lots to be done there. So any of you who have any kind of experience in that, expertise in that, I'm sure there are places where they would love to have your help. Students, I think that I spoke about the need to change our educational systems, but I also think that each one of us, both in our families and in our friends, and certainly through our businesses or whatever we're doing, have to have conversations with with the young people of our time, to impress on them the fact that they have a responsibility. They have a individual responsibility in looking and informing themselves and being part of the solution. I think that the young people of today, very differently from the generations that two generations ago, or 1 or 2 generations ago that I was speaking to before, have really stepped up to the plate, are much more activist, are much more willing to be part of the solution, want to be part of the solution. Their predecessors to, as I said, 1 or 2 generations ago, were more interested in making money. That is also perfectly fine. But I think that they've understood that the stakes are so high now, and that the stakes are individual, individual responsibility in order to make sure that we all together can get to where we need to go. So I think the conversation has to happen at home. This conversation has to happen in schools, of course, as well, and they have to happen in the media, in the way that the social media are addressing the issue, in the way that the games that they're playing are addressing the issue. And in some cases, some of the game constructors, or whatever they're called, are beginning to see that and are beginning to change from completely mindless violence to much more socially responsible games, and with different kinds of structures, different kinds of outcomes. It has to be across the board an effort, a massive effort, to change the narrative and change the conversation and change the content of our conversations with them. And here again, this is also something that you guys have to do, whether you have children, you have grandchildren, or both. I think there is, again, here an individual responsibility to start a conversation with our kids in a way that maybe they're not used to, but which you have to prepare for them for the fact that they are going to be in charge of a really sick planet. And they are the ones who are going to live on it. And if they want to ensure that the planet is sustainable for their children and their grandchildren, they are going to have to take a level of responsibility that you and I didn't have to do when we were their age. I think it's pretty simple. It's as simple as that. I mean, simple. It's as clear-cut as that.
Thank
Yes,
you, Mr.
that
Moller.
was the three ones. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah,
What time is
just
it?
maybe a last one, because we are running out of time, but a tricky one, which is a little bit outside what, not outside the context, but outside the questions that we just mentioned. Sanjay is asking how the governments can keep multilateralism as an objective to tackle the virus, the pandemics, rather than pacifying the financial markets with constant rate cuts and so on. So the conflict between the health, public health, multilateral challenge, and the need to keep the financial markets and economic markets safe.
Well, I mean, the easy answer is that they should finally wake up and lead and do what they're paid to do, which is to be in charge and to lead, as we're seeing it happening in Italy, for example, and in France, where the leaders, and in Germany, and certainly in some of the African countries right now, where some of them, the leaders there, the heads of state, are taking measures that are very much preventive and not in line at all with some of the slow numbers, the small numbers that they have for the time being. But so lead, take your responsibility and do what needs to be done. I think it's here. I think that this pandering, not just to the extreme voices in their societies and to, as you said, big business in some cases, is going to drive us right into catastrophe. I think in many cases where they're not doing it, we're seeing civil society actors do it. The fact is that unless we start working on this this pandemic in a much more collaborative way, we're just not going to make it. I mean, this will be a pandemic that will go on, and we are not going to be in a place where we can prepare for the next one, because I guarantee you that there will be next ones. We have to give WHO the means, the political support, and the financial support that it needs in order to put to good use their massive amount of expertise and experience. And everybody has to sort of get under the leadership of in this case of WHO, in other cases of other structures that we have put in place to deal with these issues. I'm looking at the part of the world that I come from. I'm from Denmark, and I'm looking at what Norway, Sweden, and Denmark are doing. They have basically the same problem that started more or less the same time. And even in an enlightened, fairly very advanced societies there. Each one of them is doing his own thing. They are not coordinating. They're not talking to each other. Well, I suppose they're talking to each other, but they certainly have seem from the outside to have their own different things. The EU, which had a massive chance of showing its coordinating strength and its ability to get the whole 27 countries to march in the same direction, is completely absent. It's really quite appalling. And I think they're going to lose their ability to recover and to recover their raison d'être as a regional organization if they're not very careful. I'm answering the question by pointing out the things that are not working, that shouldn't be the part of it, and that are the catastrophic consequences of not sitting down and working together in a way that will help us lick this problem. And as I said at the very beginning of my intervention, this is going to be even more important in how we deal with the economic and financial fallout of this crisis here. If we don't sit down and work together in a really way we haven't done before, we're going to be feeding the effects of a financial meltdown for years, when maybe we don't need to have it last that long, and that we certainly have the structures in place if we use them collectively to counter the worst effects of a financial crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Møller. I'm asking to Alejandro and to you, Mr. Møller, do we have time for a last question?
Yeah, I think so. What time? Yeah, we do, yes.
Okay, so I will ask Sophia, please, to open her mic and to ask a follow-up question on humanitarian assistance. Sophia, where are you?
Hello.
Okay, please go ahead.
So I had a question with regards to the multilateral system and young people. So how can we develop a multilateral system which serves people of today and the future, but there are so few opportunities for young people to actually have a direct voice within the multilateral system? There are only really internship opportunities available. So how can we influence and make a change for a better multilateral system of the future?
Well, internships doesn't cut it. I mean, that's of course a nice way of giving them a taste of what these organizations do. You have to have a place at the table for them, and there's absolutely no way out of that. There has to be youth representatives at the table where decisions are being taken, whether it's at the national, the international, or the local levels. And it's not rocket science. You just put another chair around that table, and then you figure out a way of how these kids are going to be elected. And it has to happen. We have to have the voice of the young people as part of the conversation, and it is happening in some areas. It is certainly happening at the local level. I mean, one of the interesting developments that we're seeing, for example, in Africa, and certainly in West Africa, is the citizens groups that are being created of very educated, very vocal, very proactive young people who are in many cases are social entrepreneurs who are taking matters in their own hand, and who are being, for the time being, at least in many of these countries that are much more traditional in their governance structures, are being ignored at their peril. I can tell you, I'm absolutely certain that the kinds of things that we saw in other countries, the kinds of the springs that we saw that sort of ended up in catastrophes, but where we're seeing a much greater readiness for proactive, for activism, I would say, and for wanting to be part of the management of society, and that needs to be met. It needs to be answered. It needs to be embraced. And in some societies, they are slowly. It's happening. But in most, not yet. We are a lot behind the curve on this one. But there is no other way than to bring them into the room where things are being discussed and decided. And I can tell you, every time I did it when I was back at the UN, where we brought in representatives of the young people who worked there. We called it Young UN. And they were very much part of the conversation. They were certainly part of the search for solutions. And they were also part of the conversations that led to decisions. And it was super. It was incredible because, in fact, we ended up getting more suggestions that we could deal with. And it certainly reinvigorated the conversation, and it reinvigorated the way that certainly I was managing things, and the manner in which a good deal of the senior management were looking at how to do their business. And it started very different kinds of conversations, not just with the young people, but with everybody, all the staff, who suddenly also took part in the decision-making process and in the search for solutions, not just, here's a problem, what shall we decide? No, here's a problem, come back to me with a solution like you see it. And that was very cool. It was, and it was a beginning, and I hope that my successor is following it. I think she is. But this is the kind of things that we need to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Møller. I think more or less we exhausted the main questions that we had, certainly not 100%, but I will give the floor to Alejandro maybe for some closing remarks and some reminders on what's next on our great chats.
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for listening to me. It's been nice to be with you. I hope I didn't bore you. And as I said, those of you who have any kind of interest in joining eventually with your work and your insights, the two initiatives that I mentioned, please mention it to Manuela and to Alessandro, with a little blurb about what your expertise is, what your knowledge is, and what you would like to contribute, so that we can have a look at it.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Moller. It was really always very rich. There is always one problem. It's always the same problem. We would like to stay more time with you. We would like to exhaust all the items and benefit from your experience. Thank you very much for sharing the wealth of information and also your new initiatives. And as you know, the focus of Greycells is really very much intergenerational collaboration. So UN Youth, Rotaract, the Parlement des Jeunes in Geneva, and all the collaborations with the young people are really paramount for us. I can confirm now, because we already discussed this, that Greycells will be extremely happy to collaborate in the new ventures of the Kofi Annan Foundation. And we are extremely happy that Mrs. Maman Balian has been designated executive director. She has been collaborating with us. She was the commemoration of our 10th anniversary, and we are sure that we will have a great collaboration. As Manuela mentioned, we have a very interesting lineup, since we have, in a way, kind of captive audience. You cannot move. And this is a way of getting some good thoughts to all the issues that are in our minds when we are confined. Next week, we're going to have a targeted presentation by Lydia Grigoreva, that you know very well, Mr. Moller, and she will share with us the role that she thinks that NGOs have been playing in the past in the UN system, and more broadly in all other fora, and what is the new role that NGOs could play in this new environment post-COVID-19. So this is just one of them, possibly one each week. We're going to have one or two presentations, and we will be sharing all the information and the invitations with all young and senior collaborators. So thank you very much to you, Mr. Moller. Thank you very much to all the participants. We had participants from almost every continent, and we almost reached our peak of our subscription to Zoom. We were close to 80 participants, and our subscription goes to 100. If this continues like this, maybe we'll have to upgrade it. Well, thank you very much. Have a great evening to all of you, and good luck. This has been recorded and will be put, if you would like to share it with someone, in the Greycells webpage. Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers.